council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. Many of tonight's cases involve public hearings. For those cases, the procedure will be as follows. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take the roll.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Mr. Freed?
Here.
Mr. Haw? Ms. Jordan?
Here.
Mr. Kennard?
Here.
Mr. Larson? Ms. Lawson, sorry.
Here.
Typo. Ms. Messina? Ms. Ringler?
Here.
And Mr. Warner.
Here.
We have 7 and a quorum. Mr. Haw has arrived, so we have 8 in a quorum.
All right, the first item on our list is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I so moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second for approval. Chris, please take the vote.
Mr. Armstrong?
Aye.
Mr. Freed?
Abstain.
Mr. Haw?
Aye.
Ms. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Kennard?
Abstain?
Ms. Lawson?
Abstain.
Ms. Ringler?
Aye.
And Mr. Warner.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0 with 3 abstaining.
All right, this time we are moving on to the election of a new chairperson and then the vice chair. So I'll be handing that off. Mr. Freiander?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As most of you know, per our bylaws, we do have a re-election of the chair and vice chair every year at this time, beginning of the year. The normal process would be that if the current chair does not elect to continue, that we open this thing up to others. I think that is the case this year.
It is.
I just want to confirm. And so what we would ask at this time, I think Chris has passed out voting cards, but before we get on to that, we haven't received any before the meeting, so it is up to the commission's discretion to nominate a chairperson first, and then we'll deal with a vice chairperson after that chair is duly elected. I will remind you that the current vice chair, Commissioner Ringler, was co-chair with Ms. Cavazos, who's no longer here. So with that being said, we would, unless there's any questions, open the floor for any nominations for chair.
Commissioners, do I hear a nomination?
I would nominate Ms. Ringler.
Second.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Does anybody, and procedurally on this, should we be not asking as to whether or not there are any other nominations before we take our vote?
Mr. Chair, I think 2 things. One is make sure Ms. Ringler accepts the nomination, and then number 2, make sure there's nobody else, because we would use that in the vote. So make sure she accepts and
Absolutely. Ms. Ringler, are you willing to serve as chair?
I'm willing to serve, yes.
All right. Ms. Ringler is willing to serve as chair. Are there other nominations? I don't see any. I would love to see you sitting over here. You did a fine job last time. A voice vote is sufficient for this, I assume?
We have paper ballots. Even with one, I will come around and gather those. Is it the green one? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, we'll make this official and not put anybody on the spot. All right, let's take a moment to count the votes. How many are here tonight?
Air is thick with suspense.
Hopefully there's no stunning surprises here.
Could be like Survivor, there could have been a backdoor.
Okay. Okay. With all the votes counted, we have a unanimous selection for Ms. Ringler. So, welcome to the chair.
Congratulations.
I believe we're going to switch seats now.
At this, yes, you go ahead and we'll let you switch seats there. And then we can get on to the next item.
All right.
Ready?
All right. So at this time, we are ready to hear nominations for the vice chair. All right. Are there any nominations for the vice chair? Or anyone who would volunteer to serve?
Unless somebody else is chomping at the bit, I'm willing to serve. My reason for not staying as, or being willing to stay as chair was I may have some availability issues this year, and I didn't want us to be without a chairperson multiple times. So I am available as a backup if other people are willing to work with that restriction.
Are there any other thoughts or ideas about that?
Well, I would nominate Mr. Kennard.
Okay. We have a nomination. Are there any other nominations? Mr. Kennard just said he was willing, so we'll proceed with that maybe.
Sure. I would maybe recommend given Mr. Kennard's statement, a similar situation as we had last time,
Co-chair.
maybe a co-chair if there is another nominee. We do take self-nominees as well, to serve as co-vice chair. In the case, as we had last year, we actually had to go to the third person.
Any self-nominees? I'm looking at Brian, Commissioner Armstrong. Would you be willing to serve as a co-vice chair?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Should we take our votes then?
Sure. On this, so there's two nominees. You have the ability to vote as co. That. And what you would do if you believe that both should serve, just write, check yes under both names. If you feel only one should serve, check that one person under yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Slide over here. I think I have my vote card over there.
Yes, I think it was in your paper.
Where there it is.
Okay.
There it is.
Change the name label so we don't call her Commissioner Kennard. Almost voted for Commissioner Ringler again.
You moved, but you didn't,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take one moment to tally. Yes, 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 and yes, unanimously, the body has voted for co-vice chairs, Commissioner Armstrong and Commissioner Canara. Congratulations. Job well done. One matter of housekeeping as well, based on this, is we do have, the chair does serve on the Metropolitan Topeka Planning Organization, the MTPO. Last term, Mr. Kanar had deferred his standing on that policy board to Mr. Armstrong. So you don't have to decide necessarily right this minute, but it may be after the meeting if you are still okay, or if you want to go on record. Either way, that's fine. Madam Chair, we'll just, we'll clean that up after the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
All right, back to the agenda. We have an action item that I understand is being deferred. Is that correct? Do we need to say anything about that?
No, what we do have to do is just, and I can do that. The item is CU 18-01 by Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library. They're requesting a conditional use permit to allow for construction of additional parking to be located off-site on 1.14 acres, Zone C2 Commercial, and M12 Family Dwelling District located at the southwest corner of Southwest 10th and Southwest Garfield. This has been deferred to the February 2018 meeting, and that is going to occur on February 19th? February 19th. We have to do that if we do that to a date certain, then we don't have to re-advertise the item. February 19th it is, so they'll be back here in February. I think they got everything worked out. There was a last-minute hiccup with the site plan that was submitted, so we'll see you back there then.
All right. Next item on the agenda is a discussion item, the Quinton Heights Steel Neighborhood Plan. I understand we have a presentation.
Yes,
Staff?
Mr. Warner.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before Tim gets started here, I want to talk a little bit about process. Neighborhood plans are actually elements of our comprehensive plan. You don't see them very often at this body, but when we get into adopting neighborhood plans, it's actually a comprehensive plan amendment. So that is essentially a two-part approval process. The Planning Commission weighs in on this comprehensive plan amendments and ultimately the governing body. So we'll be back in February to have action on this item, and that will be sort of the first approval step as it, and it will go to council in March. Do want to point out also the final neighborhood meeting is actually tomorrow night, so Tim will be giving this presentation again tomorrow night in front of the neighborhood. So with that, Mr. Esparza.
Good evening, Commissioners. It's very exciting to be here because this meeting means that Quinton Heights is almost done with the final stage of the planning for the SORT program. So it's very exciting for the planning department, and it's been something that we've been working towards since I got here almost a year ago, and so it's great to see how far we've come. So, the purpose of why we're here today is back in 2016, Quinton Heights was selected as one of 2 SORT neighborhoods to receive planning assistance in year 1 and implementation and funding in years 2 and beyond. So with the planning assistance comes the creation or the update of a neighborhood plan. And the neighborhood plan seeks to provide a long-range guidance and clear direction to the city and its agencies, residents, and private-public interest for the future revitalization of the Quinton Heights Steel neighborhood. And it's important to note that this plan will cover both SORT-funded projects as well as non-funded future project recommendations. With SORT comes $1.4 million for infrastructure improvements, as well as $330,000 for community development block grant home revitalization. Public engagement is a major part of this plan, and I think it's well summarized by an old quote that came up during one of our meetings. And legend has it that at his very first meeting, our own Bill Feander met with Tennessee Town, and the first thing he said was, "What would you like to see in your neighborhood, and how can we help you get it?" And I think that's just a good way to describe the public process for this plan. In June, we went out there for the kickoff meeting, and we presented the current conditions of the neighborhood. Likewise, we kind of got a broad sense of what they wanted to see, and we received input on what strengths and weaknesses are in the area. From July to December, we met with the Plan Review Committee, and this occurred roughly 6 times, which is a little more than usual, but we came across a couple of obstacles and did it a little differently, but in the end, it worked out, and we got great input on goals, target areas, and potential projects within the neighborhood. Like Dan said, our final public meeting will be held tomorrow. At this meeting, we will finalize the implementation section of the plan and present everything that has come up this far. Just a quick overview of the Quinton Heights neighborhood. It is located approximately 2.5 miles southwest of downtown and is situated directly north of the Topeka Country Club. It is bounded by Southwest Washburn to the west, 21st to the north, Western to the east, and 27th to the south. The neighborhood comprises approximately 163 acres of land. A very brief history of the neighborhood. Quinton Heights and the Steel Addition was platted in 1887. Residential development was slowed by a lack of direct street access from the central business district, as well as no paved streets and no water lines, and periodic flooding. By 1921, most of Quinton Heights had been annexed into the corporate limits, and improvements were slowly made. In the late 1990s, the neighborhood was downzoned from M1 and C4 to R1, and I'll get into this a little bit more later. New development within the past 50 years has primarily been comprised of large multifamily uses, as well, which includes, the 68-unit Bristol Ridge apartment complex at Fillmore Street and 22nd, as well as the 90-unit mixed residential Trianon complex on 27th Street. So every 3 to 4 years, the city assesses the health of neighborhoods based on a composite rating of poverty levels, crime rates, property values, home ownership, and the number of boarded and unsafe structures within a given census block. From this, an overall rating is made on a scale of in need, which is the darker shade of red you see there in the upper right-hand corner below 2014, to healthy, which is the darker shade of blue. This system allows us to identify the most distressed areas of the city and allocate resources accordingly. So if we take a look at the health trend that's been occurring in Clinton Heights since 2000, we can see that the overall composite neighborhood health rating has dropped from outpatient to at-risk. And this is due to drops in the number of people in poverty, the number of crimes, Part 1 crimes that occurred in the neighborhood. And we've even had a higher account of boarded houses and unsafe structures. And the average residential property values have dropped as well. So we can see a steady decrease across the board. I believe it jumped back in 2007, but after that has been on the decline since. Current conditions in the neighborhood. Single-family residential is the predominant land use within the neighborhood. It comprises approximately 74% of total parcels and 52% of total units. If we take a look at the current conditions within the neighborhood, you can see that the majority of homes are showing signs of basic wear and tear, such as weathered paint or broken or cracked window panes. And roughly 1/3 of homes are showing a higher number of minor deficiencies or intermediate deficiencies, or a combination of both. And these are more serious conditions such as sagging roofs, porches, and such. I'd also like to point out the majority of single-family units in the neighborhood are occupied by renters. Continuing on with current conditions, whether you drive or walk through the neighborhood, you'll notice a few things. First off, that a large percentage of the pavement is in poor condition. Many of the streets are uncomfortably narrow to navigate on. Just to give you a little insight of how this feels, standard streets, standard local streets are typically 26 to 29 feet curb to curb. And we have streets in Clinton Heights that are 17 feet. And they feel even more narrow because of open drainage ditches on the side. So it makes you kind of uncomfortable to drive on. If you have to park to the side, it can be problematic because of those open drainage systems. Let me see. We also have gaps in the sidewalk. I had to walk around the neighborhood myself, and I can tell you it was not very easy. I was walking in the middle of streets sometimes. Lucky I had my bright yellow vest on because, it's not a very walkable neighborhood. And finally, many of the alleys are unpaved. Some of them they're in fine condition, but you drive on these and you kind of feel for the garbage man who has to do this daily because there are potholes and they are weathering and they're only going to get worse with time. The future land use section of the plan. There are two big takeaways from this aspect. After speaking with the neighborhood and looking at and comparing current zoning and what we anticipate for the neighborhood, we would like to continue to reflect the single-family character of the neighborhood. And likewise, we want to keep commercial confined to 21st Street. If you look at the top left-hand corner, you'll see that we have included mixed use. We believe this area should preserve the neighborhood's commercial, but also be more flexible to have a mix of commercial and residential or non-commercial in the same building. Just some goals of the 2018 update, which is essentially a new plan. You know, the big overarching goal is to exploit and reinforce what the neighborhood already has. Clinton Heights is probably above everything else looking to improve the neighborhood's image by strengthening the Shunga Glen Park. This was something we've heard a lot about, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. They were looking to stabilize housing by rehabilitating homes rather than adding new homes on vacant lots. And again, you know, they're looking to improve current infrastructure. And throughout the plan, if you took a look at it, we stress these three important areas. So the park, housing, revitalization, and streets as well. So we identify areas in need based on a composite score of housing conditions, infrastructure rating, crime rates, and single-family home ownership. And this can be seen by the purple and black coloring in the background, with the lighter purple being the better conditions and the black being the most need. Over that is an overlay of red and yellow. So what this is we select anchors and strengths within the neighborhood with the theory that these strong points will further enhance any improvements located nearby. So if we take a look at the map, Western Street is something we have as a potential or a strength because it was a block or it was a street that had some of the best ratings in the neighborhood. We also included the Shunga Glen Park, of course, as an anchor, and just some of the other uses as potential strengths, meaning they would become anchors if invested in. So for the primary target area, we chose a southern 5-block L-shaped area that stretches from the border to the center and includes multiple local streets. So that's, of course, I pointed it out there. We have that L shape, and that's going to be our primary target area that we identified through this, along with meeting with the neighborhood. This area consists of some of the lowest composite scores. It is largely out of the floodplain, which is something we looked at as well. And it is adjacent to Western, which we selected as a strength due to its high rating. As a secondary, we chose the 2-block area to the north that reflects low composite scores and is adjacent to Western as well. So we went out and we selected priority projects based on what the neighborhood wanted to see done. I can't stress to you enough how much or how strongly they feel about the Shunga Glen Park. It came up at almost every meeting. It's something that they feel will better the neighborhood, that is just a potential for them to strengthen the entire community. Secondly, they talked about a project on Fillmore Street from 24th to 25th. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but if you look at the picture right there, you can see that that's actually the area. It's kind of on a hill. It's a little narrow, and we received a couple complaints that during the winter time especially, parking on the side made this hazardous for trying to squeeze through, trying to get past that hill, over the hill, down the hill. And so what they suggested was limiting that to one-sided parking to decrease the narrowness. Third, they spoke about Central Park from 26th to 24th. I'll get into that more in a little bit. And finally, they identified 24th from Fillmore to Buchanan. Sort projects. So this is an overall cost breakdown of recommended sort projects based on our technical advice coupled with the neighborhood's input. As far as streets, we would recommend that $995,000 be allocated towards that. And this is going to be for street reconstruction. The Shunga Glen, one of the biggest projects they mentioned was a pedestrian bridge to connect the two sides. Because if you've ever been to that park, there are two sides. There's to the west along 21st, or along Washburn, sorry. There's a skate park, but within the neighborhood, within the interior of the neighborhood, they have more of a family feel. They have some benches, and then they have the children's playground. These two are currently unconnected over the Shunganunga Creek. So, you have to navigate around the neighborhood in order to get from one to the other. So we recommend 23% will go to the park. Sidewalks, alleys, and traffic calming devices will be mentioned as well. Sort housing. Again, we want to emphasize the potential for rehab. There were only about roughly 20 vacant lots, which is further cut down by the floodplain because federal dollars, federal CDBG funds cannot be used in the floodplain. So this vastly limits the houses that are up for rehabilitation. So a large percentage of the homes, if you take a look at that blue map, that outlines the conditions of the neighborhood. And a large percentage of the homes have several minor or intermediate deficiencies. So in the plan, we stress the fact that we want to begin in the primary, move to the secondary, as well as stay out of the floodplain. So going in a little deeper into the Shunga Glen Park, I was actually very excited at how this ended up. We talked about the park at so many meetings, and it was always mentioned to be their priority. And we invited along Mr. Bill Rapon, who is the parks planner for Shawnee County. And at the end, at one of our last parks meetings, he mentioned that he had brought this to the county, and what they decided to do was if we can do the bridge, they will do a separate plan in order to address everything else that the community wants. So when we met with the neighborhood, they mentioned they wanted all of this new sporting equipment, a frisbee golf course, new soccer goals, gazebos, new equipment, new benches. I believe the benches they currently have are hand-me-downs. So what they plan on doing is working in conjunction with our plan so that they complete their park plan in 2018 and begin their implementation along with our plan in the subsequent year. So that's good news that I plan on bringing to the neighborhood. Again, we will talk about the pedestrian bridge and how important that is, and that these two plans will align, and we will work together. I'll be attending those public meetings that are held for their plan as well. Street reconstruction. So speaking with engineers, and we had engineers go out there and walk through the neighborhood, assess the current conditions. And the infrastructure meeting I held with the neighborhood, I actually was working with one of the engineers, so he attended it. We spoke with the neighborhood. He told them everything that was feasible, everything that could happen. And what we worked out were 2 streets that they mentioned needed work. But rather than just a simple mill and overlay, engineering recommends complete reconstruction due to the street's current condition. So we have 5 blocks of total reconstruction set for the neighborhood. This includes 2-inch curb and gutter with enclosed storm. So we get rid of those open storm drains that kind of create an eyesore for the neighborhood, as well as 22-foot asphalt driving surface. So although these streets will still be subpar, they will be bigger, and they will give the illusion of being bigger because they'll have that extra 2 feet of curb and gutter on the side. Some other sort projects we are recommending. When we met with the neighborhood, they mentioned that they wanted their alleys done. But sometimes this can cause problems because if they're going to do an alley, if there's water or sewer underneath, they can be very expensive. And that was the case in Tennessee Town. So one thing we worked out with the neighborhood is to pave only the approaches. And if they want additional alleys done, they'll go back and regrade the alley and add in new gravel. So the engineer, when he worked up his cost estimates, he included all of the alley approaches abutting the streets. So we'll see that in the next map. Likewise, they identified that they wanted traffic calming at Buchanan and 24th. A lot of people apparently are speeding down Buchanan, and yeah, actually even 24th. They identified this as a very problematic area for the neighborhood. So we are recommending that a mini roundabout be implemented in that area. And finally, with any leftover money, we are going to recommend target area sidewalk infill. So this is a breakdown of non-sort projects. These are other projects that the neighborhood identified during their meeting, something that they wanted to get done. Unfortunately, it didn't fit into the budget based on their prioritization. On here, you'll see 26th Street from Buchanan to Clay. That just fell short as their number 4, and there won't be enough funds to cover that. Any additional Shunga Glen Park improvements will be done by the county, as we will do the bridge. There's a couple other alleys and traffic calming devices they wanted throughout the neighborhood. And likewise, 27th Street can be very problematic due to speeding throughout the neighborhood. So down the road, we will recommend that chicanes be built in order to slow down traffic. Potential future projects. So as I mentioned earlier, one-sided parking was their priority, their number 2 priority, right under the Shunga Park. Unfortunately, putting up signs and only allowing parking on one side is something that the engineers need to look further into. We need more community input and make sure that it's a problem with other people in the neighborhood and not just for a few. This would be quite a big move, having people who previously parked on the other side try to find somewhere else. And without paved alleys, that limits them as well. Are they gonna park in the dirt? Are they gonna? So this is something we mention in the plan as looking at further down the road. Likewise, a traffic light at 27th and Topeka. That's something that came up during one of the very first meetings, that, hey, this is dangerous. We can't make a left turn into the neighborhood because there's so much traffic in the morning. But as it currently sits, there is a traffic light at 24th and Topeka. So adding another light there would be highly unlikely without taking out the light at 24th. There has been some community opposition against removing that light, and currently warrants are just not being met to justify an additional light at that area. So this is actually not in your packets, but it's in the plan. And as you can tell, I spent a lot of time making it. With implementation, we also plan on rezoning city and county-owned land in order to reflect open space. Much of this land is not developable due to sizes and the fact that it's right there in the flood area, in the floodway. So we will recommend that the Shunga Glen Park and any city and county-owned land that runs with the creek be rezoned to, I believe they are currently zoned as commercial, a mix of commercial and residential, that those be rezoned to OS1, open space. Next steps. Tomorrow, we take this to the neighborhood, hopefully get their blessing. And after that, we don't have a date yet, but if it passes commission, on February 19th, we will be taking this to the city council. And hopefully begin implementation at the end of this year and the following years. Are there any questions?
Any questions for staff? Mr. Armstrong?
Yeah. Tim, on the non-sort projects, which is about the 3 sites from the end there. Again, those are projects not funded by the monies we're talking about, but future project wish list?
Yeah, essentially, if the money, or if the neighborhood gets additional money somewhere down the line, I know this helps with, if they ever want to apply for the empowerment grant, which I was on the committee for that, they look back at the neighborhood plan and see what does it outline. So if they ever come into money or have any other grants available and they try to get it, this will help them to achieve that.
The last one on that list, I rarely see chicanes used in a Topeka traffic calming method. How did they end up with that little traffic calming option?
This was our traffic engineer and us getting a little bit more creative. Other options did present themselves. But I think, are we planning the chicanes with the sidewalks?
Well, like Tim said, our traffic engineer is the one he did a little traffic study for the neighborhood, and that was one of the options that he came up with to help deal with the traffic on 27th Street. A sidewalk going in on 27th would be a potential future project as well. There's currently no sidewalk on that street. And it's also a bike route. So Buchanan and 27th are bike routes.
And if I may add to that as well, Commissioner Armstrong, we have made a recommendation to use Complete Streets funds with the city for 27th Street to do what they just outlined, which is a traffic calming project plus, and a potential sidewalk. There's concern from the neighborhood of the speed of the cars, as well as it being a bike route. So we're hoping that the design by our traffic engineer included, and I know it might help if we have a picture of a chicane in the future to kind of illustrate this, but they're basically bump outs into the street.
A picture of bulb outs.
Bulb outs, yeah. And so we've even looked at, could we have the bikes go through those, somewhat protected. But I think, yeah, it would help to show some illustration like that.
They already have some traffic calming on Buchanan, is that right? Speed bumps?
Oh,
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Hall?
On page 3 of your presentation, on the health trends, I don't think I'm following very well here. On number 3, the average residential property values, starting, you mentioned it was steadily declining, but the numbers you show here to me present themselves as going up in 2011 and 2014. Am I misreading that right?
You've got that right. They did go up those 3 years.
I thought, I thought I heard him say they were declining.
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Commissioner, we'll look at that. What happens on that one is we recalibrate the property values every time we do it, so they're going up. They just might not have gone up enough, and so they're going down. But we will validate that as well. That's taken straight out of our neighborhood element, but that does happen. The property values can go up, but just they're not up enough, and so they drop into a lower category. So we will check that.
And I believe they are, I'm not sure if these reflect it, but they take inflation into account as well. So that might be why.
That's exactly correct. Yes, those are inflation adjusted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, first on page, these are nitpicky things because you answered most of my substantive questions. On page 7 of the report, under land use, it says commercial uses are typically confined to the northeastern section. Was that to be northwestern section?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. No, just, and then just a request moving forward, on pages 50 and 52, you have the pavement conditions and the sidewalk conditions. And when you use 2 very dark and similarly shaded colors
Okay.
for the highest ones between very poor and serious, between intermediate and major defects, although that one's a little easier, it's hard for me to make the distinctions. So if you could do that moving forward.
Any other questions or comments for the staff?
Just an observation that's flitting through the back of my brain here. We've got a major allocation of the resources towards a park. Your neighborhood health data highlighted in red is the crimes per 100 people. I think it would be beneficial to understand how this development is going to help reduce a crime rate near where we're going to spend a bunch of money rehabbing a park that perhaps wouldn't be where somebody would want their recreation taking place. I don't know the precise locations on those crimes. I know there is a map here, but it's just kicking through my mind that that's a potential issue.
Are there any other questions or comments for the staff? hearing any, I think we will look forward to hearing the final
Thank you,
next
Commissioner.
month. Last thing on our agenda for this evening is communications to the commission. Are there any?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. There was just two real quick ones. There was if you did not hear, the council, the governing body did vote on the Aquablast recommendation that came back the second time. They voted on an amendment, to approve an amendment to your recommendation to go to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. for that, for the business. They voted that on a 6-4 vote, and then approved the total rezoning with that amendment 10-0. So I just thought I'd update you on that. We have not heard one way or the other if they're proceeding. I think they're still weighing some options, and who knows, you may hear it again. I don't know. Who knows? And then my last communication was to welcome our new commissioner, Ms. Lawson, has returned, much to her liking, home. And she grew up here as a proud Topekan, moved away a little.
This neighborhood, Quentin Heights.
I may add that this was her neighborhood.
On south.
Yes, but we are so thankful that you did come back and were able to serve on this body and get appointed. So we want to welcome you and back to Topeka as well as to this body. I think you're going to provide a lot of insight. Particularly, it's a little different after you've been here, gone away, and come back. A few things you can see differently. So we really look forward to your input.
I look forward to serving. Thank you.
Welcome. All right, with that, that completes our agenda. I would take a motion to adjourn unless there's anything else.
So moved.
Second.
Moved in second. Any objections? All right, thank you.
So we had a whole Quentin Heights plan and no mention of the spot. I don't-